can have Jesus and a therapist too. Let's talk mental health. Literally one of my favorite things to talk about, especially when we're talking about it in a faith context. Counseling and faith, therapy, and the church world sometimes don't seem like they mix. We can have faith and belief and know that God is able to perform miracles and God is able to walk us into freedom, but sometimes we also need the help of a professional. I've found therapy for myself to be incredibly helpful. There have been things that I've walked through that just didn't always make sense to me. And honestly, my first experience in counseling was I had set up a meeting with a counselor, mostly to network. I am not even kidding you. Like 3 minutes into this Zoom conversation, tears are pouring down my face. And I'm like, hold on a second. I have to set down my computer because I need to get tissues because I was unprepared for this. I'll tell you that hour of my life started to unlock some things for me that I didn't even realize were an issue. Things in my past, ways I related to people that really had gotten in the way of a lot of healthy thinking. Like I had started to adopt some unhealthy narratives about the way I see myself, about the way I view the world, a lot of things that have to do with my need to be independent, need to be in control, my challenges with relying on other people or trusting other people were all rooted in some early childhood experiences that were traumatic. I would never have labeled those things as traumas. We hear about trauma, we talk about triggers. Those are now becoming more commonplace words in our language. And I think that's a good thing. Destigmatizing mental health, destigmatizing trauma is important. But what can happen is culturally, or even in our own lives, we hear about these, what we call in the therapy world, big T traumas. Abuse, neglect, sexual assault, family divorces, deaths, things that feel like this big weight of something that's happened. But really, you look at the word trauma, it simply means wound. And anything that has been emotionally wounding could be considered a trauma. So when I think about little t traumas, so things that have happened that don't seem like a big deal, those are kind of like paper cuts. And really, one paper cut might not be a big deal, but there's a reason that there is a saying, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Because lots of little things add up to a big impact. If we don't deal with our stuff, it's like having a wound that never got cleaned out, that then became infected. And what happens with infections is if we let them go long enough, they start to take over our whole body. If you got a scrape on the playground as a kid and nobody ever cleaned it out, nobody ever took you to a doctor, nobody ever made sure it was clean and healing properly, and that scrape became infected, and this wound that hurts and is sore causes you to lash out at people when they touch it. They don't recognize that that's what is happening. They're just bumping up against you, but you know that you have this wound and it hurts. When somebody brushes by you in the grocery store, it hurts and you react. Did the person who bumped up against you in the grocery store expect you to react with that big of a reaction? Probably not. But it's because you have this thing in your life that has been undealt with. Does it mean that that the pain you're experiencing is any less real? No. That emotional pain that you experience when somebody does something or says something that triggers is very real. The problem is your response is disproportionate to what happened, because you're not just responding to the incident, you're responding through the pain of your past. If you didn't have this big infected wound, scrape, sore, bruise, whatever we're calling it, on your arm, the person bumping up against you in the grocery store probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. It might be annoying, but you're going to be able to respond with a lot more grace and compassion and like, oh, watch out, you're in my space. versus how you might react if they like pushed at an open wound. Did they know they were pushing at an open wound? No. One of my jobs a few years ago, I worked at a hospital. Our desks were all in this big long line. It's kind of like this serpentine. Anyway, you don't need to know all of the details of how our desks were aligned. The point is, our desks kind of backed up against each other. And my desk was near the window, so it was kind of on the inner circle. And then to get out of the office, you had to walk through this little line of desks. And I had a coworker who every time she got up from her desk, she would push her chair back and leave. And then the chair was in the middle of the aisleway. And it drove me batty. Literally, I'm like, why can you not just push your chair in? How difficult is it when you get up, push your chair in? We have to recognize when our response is disproportionate to the situation. Maybe I'm responding through other things in my life. Now, that doesn't give us license to say, I've experienced trauma, I've been traumatized, that's why I respond the way I respond. Who are in close relationship with us, yeah, it might be on them to know or to get to know where our open wounds are and to not pick at them, to not push and poke and prod in those areas. But it's also not fair to them for us to say, yep, this is my wound, deal. It's on us to recognize, like, I've got an open wound that's impacting my life in negative ways. And that is what counseling can do, is it helps us recognize, one, that we have a wound, because for many of us, we don't even recognize that that's what's going on, right? We react to things in our life. We react to people and to situations disproportionately all the time. But we don't ever stop to take that time to be self-aware and to say, what is really going on? What are my emotions really pointing to in this moment? We just get mad and we move on, get hurt and offended, and we cut off relationships. And sometimes that is the healthiest thing we can do. Boundaries are important. I will talk about that in another video because I have lots of thoughts and feelings about boundaries. If there is a possibility that your response to something or to someone is an overreaction or maybe an underreaction, sometimes the traumas we've experienced in life cause us to retreat, cause us to push down what we're thinking and feeling. Relationships are hard and relationships are messy, but they're way harder and way messier when we're walking around with a bunch of open wounds bleeding all over people. The wounds that others have inflicted on you are not your fault. But now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to continue to walk around and just point to that wound as the reason that you explode? The reason that you're unhealthy? Is it possible you have a wound somewhere that you didn't even realize you had? Have these negative experiences because we live in a broken world, because we're human. We start to create a narrative about who we are and how we're going to interact with the world. And sometimes that narrative is not the most healthy and not always true. So we start to develop these neural pathways of responding to things so that we can navigate our world. And that is breeding ground for the enemy to come in and to start attaching lies about who we are. He attacks our identity first and foremost. Not everything has a spiritual connection, but many things do. I love when I get to say to a client, we're going to attack this from multiple fronts. We're going to unpack your history. We're going to unpack your trauma and these patterns of engaging. We're going to look at it through a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy lens. We're going to look at it from a narrative therapy lens. What is the story of your life that you have told yourself? What are the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are connected? So we're going to attack it from this professional counseling, psychotherapy experience, but we're also going to start attacking it from this spiritual. We're going to recognize the lies of the enemy as that. We're going to claim the truth. We're going to take thoughts captive and submit them and surrender them to Christ. We're going to believe in the identity that God has spoken over you. And I'm telling you, when we do that, beautiful, amazing things happen. Freedom is possible. Don't let yourself walk around in your wounds. Are you willing to do the hard work of cleaning it out? Because it's painful. It's uncomfortable. It sometimes gets worse before it gets better, but it's so worth it, because I'm telling you, we all can have Jesus and a therapist too.